It's 38 degrees and I have turned the air conditioning off for y'all, so feel special. Hey, it's Darcy, and today we are here to do my February reading wrap up. It was a pretty busy month, but I still managed to get a bunch of stuff read, and it was also a pretty good reading month because I don't think I've put my last read into my spreadsheet yet, but I think the average rating will come out as pretty high for me because I had multiple 5-star reads and nothing below a 3-star, so pretty good in that respect. Definitely found some things I really loved. In terms of what I was getting up to, obviously work consumes a big portion of my life, especially leading up to finally doing my big inquiry project presentation thing you have to do to be a fully registered teacher in Victoria. And I've also taken on like a role of responsibility at work, so lots of stuff going on there. But I also had like our Melbourne friends meet, which there's a vlog up for. Some other like birthdays and other events were happening as well. So busy month. But yeah, we read a whole bunch, so let's just get right on into what I read. The very first thing that I finished was Nettle and Bone by Kingfisher. This was my book club read for February. I am now hosting a little book club on Discord. Feel free to come join us there. Having lots of fun so far, just being able to chat about books with people. We've got kind of a nice little community growing there, so we'd love to have you. But this is a book I loved in concept, and I was really enjoying when I started it, but I did feel kind of underwhelmed by the end, I'll admit, and ended up giving it a 3-star overall. But this is a book that very much had a fairy tale feel. You're following a character, it's basically on this quest to kill a prince, and it's very much exploring like those themes of like the treatment of women and, you know, the power men have and how they misuse that power and a lot of those types of things. And I was finding it very interesting, although perhaps also heavy-handed at some points. But I feel like, as I said, I felt like the start was really promising in a lot of what it was setting up and a lot of the ideas it had. And it had a lot of interesting ideas throughout it that very much felt like a fairy tale. But something about the way it was executed overall, as I said, just made me feel slightly underwhelmed by the end. And some of it I think was a bit because it very much followed that kind of fairy tale structure of this happened and this happened and this happened, and we didn't really focus or like stay in one place for very long. And I don't know, and I did see that apparently this was originally a short story that was extended, and so maybe that could explain some of that. But yeah, I didn't hate the experience overall, and I definitely liked some of the things it was doing, but yeah, I didn't really love it by the end. But it was really great to be able to kind of discuss it with other people in a book club space. Our current read is A Psalm for the Wild Built, if you'd like to join in. Then I read my 2 favorite books of the month. The first being The Diviners by Libba Bray. So I did give this 5 stars. I've even like tabbed it all up, which I don't do that often. And this was actually my kind of book club read-along book with Ali and Vanessa. We do some little kind of besties buddy reads, kind of bi-monthly. And so we read this in February and I loved it. And this is one of those books that I have been seeing around for so long because I've been in online bookish spaces and observing online bookish spaces for a very long time. And so when this came out many years ago, it was all over BookTube and everyone was talking about it. And I've been interested in it since then and had just never gotten around to reading it. So like, thanks for helping to push me to finally read it, I guess. But yeah, and this is also kind of that thing of showing, it really confirms that I don't have to like characters to like a book, because I disliked majority of the characters in this, especially the main character drove me nuts. Really not a fan, but the overall book I still loved. We've got like a 1920s setting, and you've got these like ritualistic murders that are happening, and you've got a bunch of people with different magical powers. So there's a lot of kind of elements there that I really like, and it all came together in a really interesting way. And you know, there were lots of like hints to exactly what was happening throughout the book, and it was quite well done, and I was thoroughly engaged the entire time. So I loved this one. I've already picked up Lair of Dreams, the second book, which I will definitely be getting to because this was a good time. This was a good time, so. My other favorite read of the month was actually technically also a book club read. Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which was one of the picks for Melbourne Bookish Book Club in February, which is another book club I'm kind of loosely involved in moderating. This is a book I'd had on my shelves for a fair while now and always wanted to get to, never got around to it. So again, book clubs are great for being that extra motivation, but I loved it so much. This is shot right up to being one of my favorite romances of all time. This is a contemporary sapphic romance, if that wasn't obvious. I also love this cover, but we're following a character who has returned to her hometown because she's been hired as a photographer for her stepsister's wedding, and there's a lot of kind of issues there that these sisters have never really gotten along, but then she runs into the best friend of her stepsister, and there's kind of immediate chemistry there, and so there's obviously those tensions there of you know, Claire being the best friend of Delilah's stepsister, and the fact that the stepsisters don't really get along and things like that. But it was also just really wholesome in a number of ways. Like there were a lot of like supportive moments and really sweet and tender moments, and we also love a hot woman with tattoos. So I just loved this a lot, and I also really liked that it had that kind of exploration of the family dynamic as well, and that exploration of that sister relationship and dynamic also made me kind of emotional. So I loved this a lot, and yeah, new favorite. So I think I rambled a bit about this in a vlog as well, so I did not just drop the book. My non-fiction of the month was Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda, is that Montell? That feeling when you can't read your own writing. But this was really interesting. I listened to this, and this obviously explores like cults and the way they kind of draw people in, and the way the language they use is really part of that. And yeah, it went through like lots of different kinds of cults, and so it was really kind of fascinating and also disturbing, and it also kind of looked at some of the, I guess, lighter things that can still be considered cults, and there was a chapter that particularly seemed relevant considering someone like kind of closer to me in my life has been sucked into what you could consider a marketing cult, which is exactly the kind of thing that was discussed in one of these chapters. But yeah, it was a really interesting read, and I really enjoyed that one. So I think that one I gave it 4 stars overall. The last like novel I read, because then I also read a bunch of manga, which I'll get into. But the last novel I read, I listened via Libba FM. Is that what it's called? My gosh, my brain right now. The heat, my brain like stops functioning once it's over a certain temperature. So the heat we've been having down here recently I've been struggling. I'm part of the like educator program on there, so I get access to some free ALCs. This is one that I got access to, so very grateful to have been able to listen to this. But I listened to Tender Beasts by Liselle Sambury, which is a YA horror. It's interesting because it kind of cuts between these two stories. We've got like the current timeline where some kids are being murdered, and all the fingers are kind of being pointed at our main character's brother. And then we're also kind of getting snippets of a diary from her mother and some things that happened when her mother was a teenager. And so we're really just trying to find out like exactly what is going on. Is her brother actually guilty? Is there something else going on? And all of those kind of things are tied up in there. And I found this really interesting. I wasn't like in love with every moment. I think I gave this a 4 out of 5 overall, but I did really enjoy the experience overall, and I liked the way that it was told and the way these different things were intertwined, and that the way it was kind of keeping you guessing, because it did that thing where it kind of switched back and forth about like, is this real? Is this what really happening? And it kind of like did a lot to make you think both ways at different points in the story. But yeah, I really like this. I love a good horror. I love a good YA horror, and this was definitely a good one. So, and it also had a little bit of the racial commentary as well, because we are following a black family, and so, you know, a teenage boy who is being treated like a man in connection to the potential murder of people and things like that. So lastly, we have all the manga I read. I did read this all physically, but at this point, all of those volumes have been returned to the library. I do a lot of reading through my library, but I read a bunch of stuff. So I read Tokyo Ghoul volumes 3, 4, and 5. I am loving this manga series so much. We're following a human boy who has become half ghoul because he had a transplant when he was in an accident, and that happened to be from a ghoul's body without anyone realizing, and so now he's half human and half ghoul. And ghouls are, you know, these like supernatural type creatures who appear human but have to eat humans in order to survive, and so, you know, there's obviously a lot of stuff going on there. Humans are trying to eradicate them, etc. And so there's a lot of interesting commentary happening there, but there's also a lot of interesting dynamics between the ghouls themselves, or then you've also got the ghouls versus I can't even remember what they're called, but the humans who are trying to hunt them all, essentially. And so there's lots of interesting stuff going on. I will say that a couple of these volumes had a lot of focus on the kind of ghoul hunters in a way that I'm not quite as interested in the other stuff that's happening, but then there's other storylines I'm really liking and finding interesting. So I think I gave volume 3 4 stars, volume 4 5 stars, and volume 5 4 stars. So obviously really loving this story. I love these kind of paranormal stories, and it's just something that's really appealing to me personally, and I'm finding it really interesting, some of the things that are happening. And you know, there was particularly a situation with a restaurant that happened, which, you know, like weird and disturbing, but also like I enjoyed that volume so much. So yeah, I'm loving this manga so much. It is one of my favorite manga I have picked up, and I will definitely be continuing. Slightly less positive note, Hell's Paradise. I read volumes 4 and 5. I'm not hating the experience, but I'm definitely not loving it like when I first picked it up. I really enjoyed the first couple of volumes, but these volumes that we're up to now, I feel like it's focusing a lot on like fight scenes, basically, and that's not really my thing. The thing that really intrigued me about Hell's Paradise was this kind of horror landscape and the horror themes that were in it, and the backstories we were getting to some of the characters and learning about the characters within this horrifying landscape. And as I said, like there's still some interesting things kind of happening, and enough that I'll probably keep picking up volumes at this point, but I'm also just not loving it as much because there seems to be so much emphasis on having these big battles, essentially. So I gave those volumes both 3 stars. But that overall is a series about like some criminals, essentially, who have been taken into this hellish landscape in order to get like an elixir of life, because they've been promised a pardon if they bring it back. But then they get there, and yeah, they have a bunch of other terrors to deal with. And then lastly, I read the first volume of Spy Family. This is something that I have heard in passing of many, many times. I know the anime is really popular right now. I mean, I recently went to an anime merch type store in Sydney, and there was so much Spy Family stuff in there. But I've never seen the anime, and I only picked up the manga because I saw that they happened to have the first volume in my library when I went in there and picked up a bunch of manga. So I decided to give it a go, and I loved this. I gave this first volume 5 stars, so I definitely need to look into picking up the next volumes now. It was just so fun and interesting. We're following this faux family because we've got a spy who needs to take on this role that requires him to have access to a school. So he adopts a child to pretend that that child's his own, to kind of be able to gain access to that school and gain trust of that school. But then they're also a very kind of posh, strict school, so there needs to be a mother figure as well, and so he ends up making this kind of deal situation with a woman who, unbeknownst to him, is an assassin. And then, unbeknownst to both of them, the child can read people's minds. So it's a very interesting dynamic that's also had even in that first volume alone, had some really wholesome moments as well. And I'm so intrigued to find out where this goes because I loved that first volume so much. So yeah, that was my reading in February. Overall, I really enjoyed majority of the things I read, and majority of the things I read were quality. And even the things that I didn't love, I still mostly enjoyed overall. So we had a good reading month. I don't know if we'll be able to keep that up for the rest of the year, but that is what it is. I would love to hear what you think of any of these if you've read them. I'd love to hear your manga recommendations since I'm really getting into manga at the moment. Or I'd love to hear just what was one of the best things that you've read recently. Otherwise, that's going to be it from me today. TTFN and Stasi out.